All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, the consequences for corporate media are finally starting. Yesterday, President Donald Trump's campaign announced that it would not allow any reporter from Bloomberg News to cover its rallies. Their statement says, quote, Bloomberg News has declared that they won't investigate their boss or his Democrat competitors, many of whom are current holders of high office, adding that, quote, since they have declared openly their bias, the Trump campaign will no longer credential representatives of Bloomberg News at their rallies or other campaign events. The move was, of course, met with whining from the cable news syndicate, couched as another attack by the president on the so-called fake news media, with Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwait writing, the accusation of bias couldn't be further from the truth. We have covered Donald Trump fairly and in an unbiased way since he became a president and will continue to do so despite restrictions imposed by the Trump campaign. The New York Times editor-in-chief Dean Baquet, he even got in on the action, saying, quote, Bloomberg News is one of the largest and most influential news organizations in the world. We condemn any action that keeps quality news media from reporting fairly and accurately on the presidency and the leadership of the country. Anyone with a functioning frontal cortex should snort at the idea that a media organization which bears the name of a Democratic presidential candidate can possibly cover their potential opponent fairly. Bloomberg News let the cat out of the bag in their original statement after the New York mayor's candidacy was announced. They said, quote, they will continue their tradition of not investigating Mike. As I noted at the time, Bloomberg saying the quiet part out loud. They confirmed that when oligarchs own media companies, there are massive conflicts of interest. It showed just how hollow so much of the sanctimonious preaching from the Brian Stelter types over at CNN are when they tell us that the people at Bloomberg, the Washington Post, and the New York Times are the fairest, most objective people on earth. It should chill you to your bones that the editor-in-chief of the newspaper of record feels compelled to stand up for a news organization that has openly admitted its bias and is owned by the 9th richest man in America. Before our very eyes, we have one of the most transparent displays of the alliance between the news media and the moneyed elite in this country. And if you think that conservatives are the only one talking about this, check out this clip from a familiar figure from about 16 years ago.
In America, we have a handful of corporations like General Electric, Viacom, huge corporation owning CBS, Disney, huge corporation owning ABC, AOL Time Warner, huge corporation owning CNN, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation owning Fox, New York Post, other media outlets all over the world. As bad as that situation is, who owns the Washington Times? Yeah, what about that guy? Does he believe in democracy? Well, you should study it. It is important to understand who owns what.
The man makes a good point. Recall that Washington Post editor-in-chief Marty Baron said that Sanders was peddling a, quote, conspiracy theory for suggesting that his negative coverage in the newspaper was in any way tied to the paper's ownership by Jeff Bezos. That is what drives us all mad. People are smart. They know that when somebody owns something, they have influence over their product. They know when a news organization literally bears somebody's name, they're going to act in their favor. That's just how business works. Don't try and tell us otherwise. If they did that from the very beginning, then maybe people would have some trust left in the media. But they're going to continue to gaslight us, and we're going to continue to shake our heads because the struggle always continues. And that is the thing, Crystal. I mean, if they had just said from the very beginning, they're like, look, we're Bloomberg News, we're owned by Mike Bloomberg, we don't investigate Mike Bloomberg, and we have an obvious bias between these corporations. I honestly would be like, okay, sure, you know, whatever. Yeah. But don't come out and say, we are the fairest news organization on earth. And the New York Times is like, this is an attack on the fair media. You know what's an attack on the fair media? When these guys go, these oligarchs buy media organizations or control them and then try and gaslight the American public. That is an attack on all of our brain cells.
Well, and the thing that's hilarious is that, like, this is so clearly a troll by Trump, and good. They just can't help but take, like, they cannot help themselves but to take the bait and go, oh, the freedom of the press, blah, blah. I mean, look, it is, they have objectively admitted to their bias. They're not investigating now, not only Bloomberg, but the entire field. So how
but they're going to investigate Trump? What?
Right. You can't really say that that's fair. I also think, you know, it's remarkable. David Serta, who's a senior advisor to the Sanders campaign, there was a whole flap over whether he had had any communications with the Sanders campaign, et cetera, before he joined the team, and it was this big scandal, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, a bunch of these guys jumped directly from Bloomberg News over to Bloomberg's campaign, and we're supposed to be just like fine with that.
Because that's the way, that's the accepted way of doing business.
Right.
It's fine if you work for the Bloomberg editorial board and now you go work for the Bloomberg campaign.
Right.
And if you're going to employ every journalist on the planet, they employ 2,700 journalists across the world. Think about that. It's one of the largest news gathering organizations in the world. A Bloomberg reporter flies on Air Force One as a member of the press pool. This is a real news organization, and their editor-in-chief is coming out and just saying, yeah, we're not going to investigate.
But it even goes beyond that. I mean, we had Zed Jalani on, who talked about when he worked for Center for American Progress's Think Progress blog, and he wrote a critical piece of Bloomberg's then girlfriend with regards to Occupy Wall Street. Neera Tannen, who was running Center for American Progress, said, oh, we can't go there because we're trying to get money from Bloomberg. So even the financial ties that you don't see impact the coverage and what people are willing to say. Because ultimately, look, journalists, reporters, et cetera, they're all doing this calculation of, is this story worth it? Is it worth it in terms of my personal risk, my career risk? You know, am I going to be shut out of sort of the access world and the career ladder within journalism? And when you have a figure like Bloomberg, there's just no doubt that for most people, they just go, you know what, I'm just going to let it slide.
I can probably tell you pretty definitively, I will never be working for Bloomberg News. And here's the thing, that is actually a career problem for a lot of people, right? They pay great salaries. They have a lot of people that they've employed that work in a lot of these major news organizations, have worked in major news organizations in the past. They have a huge opinion column with some of the best contributors, and all of these people have their hands completely tied because it's all run by a single monomaniacal figure of Michael Bloomberg, the 9th richest man in America, who has very specific interests. They even said in the editorial board, the editorial page of Bloomberg News represents the views of Michael Bloomberg.
Right.
It's as clear as day. When you have the platform in order to force your views on the American public, craft the media space, nothing could be more valuable. Every journalist is going to think twice before tweeting something mean about Michael Bloomberg. Everybody's going to think twice about investigating Amazon. People are going to think twice before investigating the Sulzberger family, who owns the New York Times. These people are untouchable because they own the organs of media in this country.
And what people really hate is that they will deny that they're biased at all. It's all just neutral and objective. Like, people know where we're coming from, our perspective, the lens that we view the world through, and they know that we're analyzing the news through that lens. We're upfront about it, and I think people appreciate that so much more than pretending to just be, oh, I'm just a fact checker, balls and strikes, just down the middle, when it's so clear that you do have an ideology, that you are affected by the bias of your organization and your own worldview, but you hide the ball on it.
You know what is a conspiracy theory? The idea that the richest man in America can own the second most powerful newspaper and that it has no bearing whatsoever on their coverage. That is a conspiracy theory.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.